The Hunt Lord Vasek Orun had killed 11 species, and he had recorded the death sound of every one of them. He kept the recordings in a vault behind his throne, on the great hunting ship the Bone Crown, and on quiet nights he played them. The wet click of the Senate as their shells were cracked open, the high singing of the Alu before their sons were taken, the long, falling silence of the Dreven, who had begged in a language no one bothered to learn. Each death had a voice. Each voice told Vasek Orun the same thing. The galaxy belonged to the ones who could make the sound, and not to the ones who made it. That was the law of the Kereth Talon Court. It was older than writing. It was older than the stars they had burned. A people were only as real as the noise they could force out of their enemies, and the Kereth had forced more noise out of more enemies than anyone alive could count. The law was not a cruelty to them. That was the part the conquered peoples never understood until it was too late. To the Kereth, the law was simply true, the way gravity was true. A people that could not make another people scream had not earned a place among the stars. A people that could be made to scream had announced, in the only honest language there was, that it had always belonged to whoever could pull the sound out of it. The Kereth did not hate the species they broke. You do not hate a thing you are only collecting. They broke them the way a careful keeper presses a flower, to hold the moment forever, to prove that the moment had been theirs. Vasek Orun had pressed 11 flowers. He was old now, old even for a hunt lord, and he had begun to think about the 12th. A keeper liked his collection to be even. 11 was a number that itched. 12 would sit better behind the throne, 12 voices in the vault, a full hand of dead peoples to play on the quiet nights when sleep would not come, and only the old recordings could fill the dark. So when the small blue world at the edge of the Talon Court's maps began to send messages, Vasek Orun listened to them the way a hungry man reads a menu. The messages were polite at first. They asked the Kereth to stay out of a region of space the humans called their border. They listed worlds the humans had settled, by name, each name spoken with a strange care, as if the worlds were not territory but family. They asked, in patient words, that those worlds be left alone, and they offered, in return, trade and knowledge and a long, quiet peace. Vasek Orun played the messages to his court the way he played the death sounds. As entertainment, he had them translated and read aloud in the throne hall, and the assembled hunters laughed at every line. The humans had no fleet anyone had ever seen. They had no death sound on record. They had never, in all the years the Kereth had watched the edge of the maps, forced so much as a whimper out of another living thing. They were, by the only law that mattered, not real. They were a noise the galaxy made, like wind in a canyon, and a noise could be silenced. His weapons reader, a lean and graying Kereth named Drell Sath, measured the human transmissions and reported what he found. The humans had 1,100 ships in their whole border. The largest was 800 meters. The Kereth had a single hunting ship larger than that, and they had 40,000 of them. "They are loud," Drell Sath said, "for a people who cannot bite." The court roared. It was the kind of line that made a career. Vasek Orun let the laughter run and watched his weapons reader and noticed that Drell Sath did not laugh with the rest. Drell Sath had said the line, but he had said it the way a man names a thing that worries him, to make it smaller. The Hunt Lord filed that away. He had kept Drell Sath close for 90 years because the weapons reader was never wrong about a fleet, and a Hunt Lord who ignored the one voice in his court that was never wrong did not stay a Hunt Lord long. Then Vasek Orun sent his own message back to the blue world, and he made sure it was simple enough that even a creature with no death sound could understand it. He said the Kereth Talon Court would arrive in 60 days. He said the humans would kneel, or the humans would scream, and that either way the Kereth would have a new recording for the vault. He had it translated into the humans' own language, so there could be no mistake, and he had it sent on every channel the humans used, so that every human world would hear it at once, and have 60 days to feel the size of what was coming. The humans answered within the hour. Their answer was not a plea. It was not a list of worlds. It was 3 words, sent in plain Kereth, perfectly pronounced, with no fear in them at all. They said, Then come closer. Drell Sath went still when he read it. He read it again. He ran it through every filter he had, looking for the tremor that every prey put into its defiance, the crack in the voice that told you the brave words were a wall thrown up over a scream already building. He found nothing. The 3 words were calm all the way down. Whoever had sent them had meant them, and had meant them gently, the way you might say come closer to a child who was afraid of the dark, and not the way a cornered thing snarled it. He had measured 1,100 human ships and found nothing that could hurt a single hunting ship. But he had been a weapons reader for 90 years, and the stillness in those 3 words bothered him in a place his instruments could not reach. He had heard a great many peoples answer the Talon Court's sentence. He had never heard one answer it like that. The brave ones shouted, the proud ones threatened, the clever ones bargained. Not one of them, in 90 years, had ever simply invited the Kareth in. He brought the concern to Vasek Oren. He stood at the foot of the throne, with the vault humming its 11 held silences behind it, and he said the humans were too calm. He said calm was a thing a people earned, and the humans had not earned it from anything the Kareth had seen. He said a creature did not say come closer to the largest fleet in the galaxy unless it knew something the fleet did not. Vasek Oren told him that calm was just a quieter kind of scream. He said the loud ones always went the quietest at the end, that the silence before the break was the deepest silence of all, and that this only made the recording sweeter. He told Drell Sath that the humans had simply skipped to the quiet part early, out of some strange custom of their own, and that the Talon Court would be happy to provide the rest. He told his weapons reader to ready the vault for a 12th voice. Drell Sath bowed, and went, and readied the vault. But he ran the 3 human words again that night, alone in his chamber, 100 times over, listening for the crack that was not there. And the more he listened, the more he became certain of one thing, the way a man becomes certain of a coming storm, not from any single cloud, but from the weight of the whole sky. The humans were not skipping to the quiet part out of fear. They were inviting the Kareth to the quiet part on purpose. And a people that wanted you in the silence with them was not a people that had run out of noise. It was a people that had decided, for reasons of its own, that the silence was where it did its best work. Vasek Oren gave the order, and the Kareth Talon Court turned toward the blue world to take what the law said was theirs. What the law had never accounted for was the thing waiting behind the human border. The humans had 1,100 ships, yes. Drell Sath had counted them correctly, but he had counted only the ones the humans let him see. There was one more. It did not show on any Kareth chart. It did not answer scans. It gave back no heat, no light, no signal an instrument could catch. It sat far behind the human worlds, in the dark between 2 dead stars where no shipping lane ran and no scout ever looked, and it had been sitting there, finished and silent, for 19 years. The humans had a name for it, but they did not speak the name on open channels, because a name was a kind of warning, and the humans had decided, a long time ago, that this thing would arrive without one. They called it the Deep Choir. The name had been chosen with care, the way the humans chose everything about the ship. A choir is many voices that become one. The Deep Choir was the same, a single hull that held 900 smaller voices and 40 great ones, and the patient breath at its heart, all of them tuned to sing together when the moment came. And it was deep in 2 ways. It was deep because it sat in the deepest dark the humans owned, far behind their worlds, where no one would find it. And it was deep because its voice reached down, past armor, past weapons, past every defense a ship could raise, to the one buried place where every hull keeps the note of its own undoing. A people who named their greatest weapon a choir were telling anyone who cared to listen exactly what kind of people they were. They were not telling the truth loudly. They were folding it into a quiet name and setting it in the dark, the way they folded a calm breath into a song, so that the meaning would only be understood by the ones who came close enough to need to understand it. It was 4,000 meters long. It was not a hunting ship. It was not built to bite, and it was not built to be fast, and it was not built to be seen. It was a mothership, a carrier, and a cathedral, and a weapon, all in one enormous hull, and it carried inside it 900 smaller craft, and a sound the galaxy had never been forced to hear. The humans had built it for exactly one purpose. They had not built it to defend a border, though it would. They had not built it to win a war, though it would do that too. They had built it for the day someone with a vault full of death sounds came to add their voices to the collection. They had built it for a keeper. They had spent 19 years and the wealth of 100 worlds building a single ship to teach a single lesson, and they had been patient enough to let it sit in the dark for all that time, waiting for the right student. On the day the Careth turned toward Earth's border, a young signal keeper aboard the Deep Choir named Ren Sully was eating cold rations in the dim of the resonance deck, listening to the hull hum the way it always hummed, and waiting for the order she had trained her whole short life to hear. She was 22 years old. She had grown up on a station within feeling distance of the great ship, close enough that on certain nights the Deep Choir's low patient note ran through the deck plates and into the soles of her bare feet, and she had decided as a child of 9 that she would learn to speak to the thing that made that sound. She had never fired a weapon. She had never wanted to. Her entire job, the only job she had ever trained for, was to listen, and to make the ship listen, and to know the exact moment the listening had to stop. The resonance deck was the heart of the Deep Choir. From her long curved console, wrapped in the very center of the hull, Ren Sully could feel the whole vessel as sound. The 900 craft in the launch bays were a low murmur, sleeping. The reactors were a deep open chord that never changed. The 40 great resonance cannons that ran the length of the spine were silent strings, drawn taut and waiting, each one capable of a note that could shake a 1,000-year-old hull into dust. She knew every one of them the way a musician knows the strings of an instrument she has played her whole life. She knew which ones rang true and which ones needed coaxing. She knew, better than anyone alive, what the Deep Choir sounded like when it was about to sing. When the order came, it came as a single word, and the word was hers to act on. Captain Edric Ban, who had commanded the great ship since the day it was finished and had waited 19 years to use it, did not raise his voice when he gave it. He never did. He simply leaned toward the resonance deck and spoke the word the whole crew had carried in their chests for 2 decades. The word that meant the long wait in the dark was finally over. The word was sing. The Careth Taloncourt did not creep toward Earth. It did not scout. It did not hide. It came the way it always came, in the open, in a long line of 40,000 hunting ships stretched across the dark, so that the prey would see it for days before it arrived and have time to feel small. The Careth believed the waiting was part of the weapon. A people that watched its death approach for a week was already half broken when the death finally came. That too was the law. Vasek Oren rode at the front aboard the Bone Crown. He liked the prey to know which ship to scream at. He liked to be the last thing they saw, the great bone-white hull at the head of the line, the throne behind which the vault hummed with 11 voices. He had led every approach himself for 200 years. He had never once ridden at the back. A hunt lord at the back of his fleet was a hunt lord who expected to lose, and Vasek Oren had never expected to lose anything in his life. For the first 50 days, the humans did exactly what the law said frightened prey would do. They pulled their colonists inward. They drew their 1,100 ships back toward their home system. They sent no more messages, no more lists of worlds, no more of that strange, patient pleading. To the Talon Court, the silence read as surrender beginning, the first soft cracking of a people that had finally understood the size of what was coming. Drell Sath alone read it differently. He watched the human withdrawal not as a panic, but as a pattern. The humans were not fleeing. They were folding. Each world they pulled back from cleanly, in order, leaving nothing behind, taking everything with them, the way a hand closes finger by finger into a fist. There was no scramble. There was no abandoned cargo, no stranded ship, no sign anywhere of the chaos that fear produces. The humans were retreating the way an army marches, and an army that retreats in perfect order is not retreating at all. It is choosing its ground. He brought this to Vasek Oren, and Vasek Oren told him that a fist meant nothing on a creature with no teeth. He told his weapons reader that he was an old man frightened by tidiness, and that the humans were simply a neat people, the way some prey were neat, combing their fur even as the hunter closed in. Drelsath bowed and said no more, but he moved his own station, quietly, from the forward observation gallery to the deep reading chamber near the bone-crowned stern, where his instruments could see behind the fleet as well as in front of it. He told himself it was a better vantage. He did not let himself say the other reason, which was that for the first time in 90 years he wanted to be able to see what was coming up behind him. On the 58th day, the Careth crossed into human space, and the humans showed them the first ring of defenders. It was 400 ships, mid-sized, none larger than 700 meters, arranged in a wide shallow curve across the approach, like a held breath. To Drelsath's instruments they were nothing, 40,000 against 400. The court did not even slow. Hunters drummed their consoles. The forward ranks began to call the opening of the kill, the old Careth song that had no words, only a rhythm, the rhythm a fleet made when it smelled a death close enough to taste. What the court did not understand was that the 400 ships were not there to win. They were not even there to fight. They were there to make the Careth commit. They were there to pull the whole 40,000 ship line into a single dense formation, the way a hunter draws a beast onto the exact spot where the trap is set. The humans had studied the Careth for 19 years. Every recorded approach, every conquest, every pressed flower in the vault. They knew the Talon Court could not resist a kill it could see. They knew the law forbade it. A Careth fleet that came upon a small enemy did not surround it slowly and starve it out. That would be respect, and the Careth did not respect prey. A Careth fleet massed, and struck all at once, and took the death sound in a single overwhelming moment, because the law said the kill should be loud and total and proud. So Vasek Orun did the only thing the law allowed. He massed his fleet. 40,000 hunting ships drew in from their long line into a tight killing wedge, all of them aimed at the same 400 human defenders, all of them close, all of them in one place, all of them facing forward, toward the prey, toward the front, none of them facing back. And 4,000 kilometers behind that wedge, in the dark, the Careth had already passed through and stopped watching. In the empty space between two dead stars, where there was supposed to be nothing at all, the deep choir woke up. Ren Sully felt it, before any alarm sounded. She felt it in the resonance deck, in the soles of her boots, in the small bones of her ears, in her teeth. The hull had hummed at one steady note her entire time aboard, a low, patient drone she had long since stopped hearing, the way you stop hearing your own heartbeat. Now the note changed. It climbed. It thickened. The whole 4,000-meter hull was tuning itself, every plate and spar and chamber and beam pulling slowly into pitch, and she understood, all the way down, that the thing she had trained for since she was 9 years old was no longer a drill. The deep choir was waking up around her, and it was waking up hungry. Her hands found the console without being told. She brought up the launch decks, the reactors, the long spine of the 40 cannons, and she felt them all answer her, alive and ready and tuned. She brought up the targeting, and there in the dark 4,000 kilometers ahead of her was the thing the whole ship had been built for. 40,000 hunting ships, massed into a single wedge, packed so tight that the spaces between them were smaller than the ships themselves. The humans could not have asked for a better arrangement if they had built it by hand, which, in a way, they had. The 400 defenders had drawn the Careth into the one shape that made the song most efficient, the dense crowd, where every broken hull's pieces flew into the hulls around it, where the sound could not escape, where 40,000 ships were close enough to be treated as one. Captain Edric Band's voice came over the deck, even and unhurried, the voice of a man who had waited 19 years and saw no reason to rush the last few minutes. He said the Careth were massed. He said the trap was sprung. He said it was time to let them hear us. Ren Sully put her hands flat on the console and began to bring the ship to pitch. This was the part no other species in the galaxy understood, because no other species had ever built a ship the way the humans built the deep choir. The Careth built hunting ships to bite, to throw fire and metal, to tear, Every other people the Kareth had met built the same way, more or less, because it was the obvious way, because if you wanted to break a thing, you struck it. The humans had asked a different question. They had asked not how to strike a ship, but how to find the one place where a ship was already broken, the one pitch at which it wanted to come apart, the secret weakness sealed into every hull by the simple fact that it had been built by hands and welded along seams and held together at joints. Every ship in the galaxy had a note. Strike that note hard enough, and the ship would do the breaking for you. So the deep choir was not armored first. It was an instrument first, a vast resonance body tuned across 4,000 meters of precision hull, and its 40 great cannons did not throw anything at all. They threw sound, focused and shaped and aimed across the dark, a pressure wave driven through the body of an enemy ship, until the enemy ship found its own breaking note and came apart along the seams its builders had thought were strong. One resonance cannon could shake a hunting ship until its spine snapped. The deep choir had 40, and behind them a hull built to be the largest tuned instrument any species had ever made. But Edric Band did not fire the 40 cannons first. He did something the Kareth would spend the rest of their history trying to forget. He told Ren Sully to open the hull. Not breach it, open it. The deep choir's outer plating was built in vast overlapping panels, and along the spine those panels could draw back, slow and enormous, the way a great mouth opens. Beneath them lay the resonance body itself, the tuned heart of the ship, the part that was meant to be heard. The deep choir had been designed so that when it sang at full power, the song would not stay inside the hull, would not be wasted on the empty dark. It would pour out across every frequency the Kareth used, every channel the hunting ships used to talk to each other, to find each other, to feel like one people in the dark, would carry the human song straight into Kareth ears. Because the humans were not going to attack the Kareth ships first. They were going to do something worse. They were going to make the Kareth listen. Ren Sully had spent 2 years building the song. It was the work she had been chosen for, the work she had given her short life to. She had started from the recordings the Kareth had bragged about for centuries, the contents of the vault behind the Bone Crown's throne, which human intelligence had quietly copied 9 years before, in an operation that had cost 3 lives and would never be spoken of. She had the wet click of the Senate, she had the high singing of the Alu, she had the long falling silence of the Dreven, who had begged in a language no one bothered to learn, except that the humans had learned it, every word, and knew exactly what the Dreven had been saying as they died. She had layered all 11 voices together, tuned each one to the deep choir's hull, woven them into a single overwhelming chord of death, the entire collection of the Talon Court's pride sung back at once. And beneath all 11, low and steady, she had laid one more voice that was not a death sound at all. It was a human voice, recorded calm, saying nothing, just breathing, even and slow and entirely without fear, underneath the screaming of 11 murdered peoples. When the Kareth heard it, they would understand. The 11 voices above were the ones the Kareth had killed, returned out of the dark, refusing to stay in the vault. The calm voice beneath was the one the Kareth had called not real. It was the one that had not screamed, and was not going to, and was breathing on, steady and unhurried, underneath everything the Talon Court had ever done. Ren Sully brought the ship to pitch. The great panels along the spine drew back, slow and silent, and 4,000 meters of tuned hull opened to the dark. And on Edric Band's word, in the one word he had carried for 19 years, she let the deep choir roar. The sound left the ship on every Kareth frequency at once. It crossed 4,000 kilometers in an instant, not as a weapon yet, just as a voice, and it poured into the massed wedge of 40,000 hunting ships from behind, from the empty dark they had stopped watching, from the place where there was supposed to be nothing. Aboard the Bone Crown, at the front of the wedge, Vasek Oren was watching the 400 human defenders, waiting for them to break, leaning toward the moment of the kill, when his own channels filled with the screaming of the dead. He knew the voices. He had played them for centuries. The Senate, the Alu, the Dreven, all 11 of his recordings, the proof of everything the Kareth were, the pressed flowers of his whole long life, came pouring out of the empty dark behind his fleet and into the ears of every hunter in the Talon Court at once. For one moment, the entire fleet froze. 40,000 crews, who had never in their history heard their own trophies turned back on them, who had only ever made the death sound and never received it, sat in the sudden total certainty that something behind them had opened a vault that only Vasek Orun was supposed to be able to open. The 11 voices were private. They were the Hunt Lords alone. To hear them coming out of the dark, on every channel, was to hear the one secret of the Talon Court spoken aloud to the whole fleet, and it stopped the Kareth the way a hand on the throat stops a song. And beneath the 11 screaming voices, calm and even and utterly without fear, a single creature breathed. Drell Sath, the weapons reader who had counted 1,100 human ships and found nothing that could bite, heard the breathing first. He was at the stern of the Bone Crown, in the deep reading chamber, with his instruments pointed back the way they had come, and so he was the one Kareth in all of the Talon Court who was already looking at the dark when the dark began to sing. He turned to his instruments. There was a ship behind them. There had always been a ship behind them. It had let the whole fleet pass, and had said nothing, had given back no signal, because it had wanted them all in one place, massed and close and certain, and facing the wrong way. He measured it as fast as his instruments could move, 4,000 meters. He had never read a hull that size in his life. He read its frequencies and found no weapons he understood, no railguns, no torpedo tubes, no fire, no metal, nothing the Kareth knew how to fear. The ship carried no bite at all. By every reading his instruments could take, the great hull behind them was unarmed. He almost said so. He almost opened the channel to the throne and told the court there was nothing to fear from a ship that could only sing. The words were in his throat. 90 years of being right pulled at him to say them. Then the deep choir stopped being a voice and became a weapon, and Drell Sath learned, in the space of a single breath, the difference between a sound that is meant to be heard and a sound that is meant to kill. The first note of the killing song hit the rearmost rank of the Kareth wedge. A resonance cannon does not flash. It does not roar across space the way a gun does. There is nothing to see, no beam, no shell, no fire. There is only the moment when a hunting ship that has stood for 1,000 years suddenly finds every weld in its hull shaking at once, every plate and spar and beam driven to its own breaking pitch, the whole great bone-white body ringing like a struck bell at the exact frequency it cannot survive. And then the ship simply comes apart. Not torn, not burned, shaken into pieces along the seams its own builders had hammered shut, dissolved into drifting wreckage that still rings faintly with the note that killed it. 300 hunting ships in the rear rank broke at once. They did not explode the way ships explode in a battle, in fire and pressure and a clean, bright death. They unmade. Hulls split along their length. Spines snapped clean in the middle. The great bone-white plating the Kareth were so proud of peeled away in sheets and drifted, and the crews inside felt their own ships dissolve around them while the song went on and on. 11 dead voices and 1 living breath, played at a volume that turned proud metal into dust. Aboard the Bone Crown, at the head of a fleet that was now dying behind him, Vasek Orun finally understood that he was not the hunter. He stood from the throne. For the first time in 200 years, the Hunt Lord of the Kareth Talon Court stood from his throne in the middle of a kill, and what he felt was not the warm certainty of the law, but a cold thing crawling up from somewhere beneath it, a thing he had spent his whole life teaching others to feel. The 11 voices poured into his ears, his own collection, his own pride, and underneath them the calm breath went on, even and slow, not afraid of him, not afraid of anything, and Vasek Orun realized with a slow horror that the breath was not a recording of fear at all. It was a recording of patience. The humans had not sent him a scream, they had sent him a promise. He gave the only order he knew how to give. He told the Talon Court to turn, and to bite the thing behind them. 40,000 hunting ships, the largest war fleet the galaxy had ever assembled, began to wheel around in the dark to face the single human ship that had no weapons it could see. It was the worst thing they could have done, and the humans had known they would do it. A fleet massed into a forward wedge cannot turn quickly. The ships at the front have the farthest to come about. The ships packed in the middle have nowhere to go. The whole tight killing formation that the 400 defenders had so patiently drawn the Kareth into now became a trap of a second kind, because to face the deep choir, the wedge had to unfold itself in the open, slowly, ship sliding past ship, and every second of that turn, the song reached deeper into the crowd. The Kareth could not turn fast enough to bite. They could only turn fast enough to die facing the right way. And in the heart of the deep choir, Ren Sully heard the captain say, quietly, that the Kareth had finally noticed them, and that this was good, because now they were all facing the right way to hear the rest of the song. She brought the second movement up. On the resonance deck, Ren Sully felt the whole ship lean into it. The deep choir had a way of moving when it sang, not through space but through itself, a vast slow shudder that ran the length of the hull as the cannons drew and released, and she rode that shudder the way a rider rides a great animal, feeling for the moment each note wanted to land. The targeting fed her a picture of the turning Kareth fleet, 40,000 ships unfolding from their wedge, and she did not think of them as 40,000. She thought of them as one instrument, badly out of tune, that the deep choir was going to bring into its final pitch. That was how she had been taught to think of it, because thinking of 40,000 crews was a thing a person could not hold, but thinking of one instrument was a thing she could. She set her hands and chose the first note of the run, and the ship leaned and sang. The hull climbed to a new pitch. The 40 resonance cannons along the spine, which had fired as one to take the rear rank, now began to fire in sequence, a rolling chord that swept across the turning Kareth fleet from one edge to the other. It was the difference between a fist and a hand drawn slowly across strings. Ship after ship after ship found its breaking note and shook itself to pieces. Not all at once now, but in the order the song chose, a long unbroken run of dissolving hulls that moved through the wedge the way a wave moves through water, and there was nothing in the entire Kareth science of war that knew how to stand in front of it. Drell Sath, at the stern of the Bone Crown, did the thing his instruments demanded and the thing his pride forbade at the same time. He counted. 300 ships gone in the first note, then 600, then 1,000, then 2, the number climbing in a steady rhythm that matched the rolling of the cannons, and he understood that the climb would not stop, that it had no reason to stop, that the song would simply keep finding hulls until there were no more hulls to find. He had spent 90 years measuring how long a fleet could last in a battle. He had never measured a fleet that was not in a battle at all. The deep choir was not fighting the Talon Court, it was processing it. The 400 human defenders in front, the bait, the fist, had not fired a single shot. They did not need to. They sat in their wide, shallow curve and watched the largest fleet the galaxy had ever built die behind them, and they held their formation, perfectly, the way the humans had withdrawn world by world, the way the humans did everything, in order, without panic, with a patience that the Kareth had no name for. They had been sent to die, those 400 crews, and they had known it when they took the post, and not one of them had run, because the humans had decided, 19 years before, that the Kareth would not be allowed to scream until they had first been made to listen. The 400 had volunteered to hold the door open while the great ship in the dark behind the enemy did its work, and the work did not require them to fire even once. This was the thing the Kareth could never have planned for, because it was not a tactic the Kareth had a word for. It was discipline. The 400 crews sat in the path of the largest fleet in the galaxy and did nothing, which is the single hardest thing a frightened creature can be asked to do. Every instinct in a living body, faced with 40,000 hunting ships, screams to fire, to run, to do anything at all rather than sit still and wait. The 400 sat still. They held the curve. They trusted the plan and the people who had made it and the great patient ship in the dark, and their stillness was as much a weapon as anything the deep choir carried, because it was their stillness that kept the Kareth massed, that kept the wedge tight, that kept the whole fleet looking forward at 400 ships that would not break, instead of looking back at the one ship that would break them. The bait worked only because the bait did not flinch, and the bait did not flinch. Drell Sath did the thing no Kareth had done in living memory. In the middle of his own people's destruction, he stopped fighting and started studying. He had 90 years of reading weapons, and he understood now that he was looking at something his whole science had no word for. The human ship did not throw anything. It did not strike. It reached across the dark and found the one pitch at which a Kareth hull wanted to fall apart, the secret note sealed into every hunting ship by the simple fact that it had been built, and then it played that pitch louder than the hull could bear. And here was the terrible part, the part that would keep Drell Sath awake for the rest of his life. Every hunting ship in the fleet had the same note. They were all built the same proud way, from the same plans to the same standard, because the Kareth believed in one true form for a warship and had perfected it 1,000 years ago and never varied it since. 40,000 ships and one weakness, shared by all of them. The humans had not needed to learn 40,000 secrets. They had needed to learn one. The Kareth's greatest strength, their flawless and unchanging design, had become the single key that unlocked the whole fleet at once. He sent his readings to the Bone Crown, to Vasek Orun, with one line attached, the only honest thing a Kareth weapons reader had said to a hunt lord in 900 years. He said the humans were not biting them. He said the humans were tuning them, like instruments, and breaking the ones that would not stay quiet. It was the kind of truth Drell Sath had spent 90 years not saying. A weapons reader served the throne by reading bite, by counting hulls and guns and the speed of an enemy line, and he had been the best the Talon Court had ever produced because he never let a feeling cloud a number. But there was no number for what the human ship was doing. There was no column in any Kareth report for an enemy that broke you by being heard. He had built his whole life on the certainty that he could measure anything that could threaten the court, and the certainty had failed him in the 1 hour it was needed, and a part of him, the honest part that had kept him useful for 90 years, almost admired the people who had made the thing his instruments could not read. They had not beaten his science. They had stepped around it entirely, the way you step around a guard who is watching the wrong door. Vasek Orun did not answer. The Hunt Lord was watching his fleet die in a way that produced no satisfying recording at all, and the silence of his own throne was the loudest thing aboard the Bone Crown. The hunting ships did not scream as they broke. They simply went silent, one after another, as the song reached them. There was no death sound. There was only the slow ending of the Kareth's own noise, channel by channel, voice by voice, the great loud chatter of the Talon Court thinning out across the dark, until ships that had been calling the rhythm of the kill minutes before were simply gone, with no last cry to mark them. For a people whose entire law was built on the noise they could force from others, this was a worse thing than any wound. The Kareth were being made silent by a ship that would not stop singing. The arithmetic of their whole civilization was breaking down in front of them. A people was only as real as the noise it could force from its enemies, and the Kareth could not force a single sound from the thing in the dark, while the thing in the dark was making the Kareth themselves go quiet, ship by ship, until the loudest fleet in the galaxy grew quieter than it had been in 1,000 years. By their own law, that meant the humans were real and the Kareth were not. By their own law, they were being unmade as a people even before their ships were unmade as ships. Vasek Orun could feel it. That was the thing the humans had understood about him that even his own court had not. The Hunt Lord was not only losing a fleet, he was losing the one idea that had held the meaning of his life together. He stood before his silent throne, and the vault hummed its 11 captured voices behind him, except now there were 12 sounds in the room, because the long-falling silence of his own dying fleet had become a recording the Bone Crown's instruments were making whether he wanted it or not. He ordered the closest 10,000 hunting ships to charge the deep choir directly. It was the last move the law had left him. If the human ship could only sing, then surely it could not stop a true charge, a wall of hulls driving forward faster than the song could break them, closing the 4,000 kilometers, smothering the great instrument under sheer numbers before its note could find them all. 10,000 ships pulled out of the dying wedge and drove forward through the dark, accelerating hard, and for a moment it looked as if the law might hold after all, because there were simply too many of them, and the human ship was only one. It was the move every cornered people made, and the humans had a name for it that the Kareth did not. They called it the Last Charge, and they had studied it across 19 years of recorded Kareth conquests, because the Kareth, for all their pride, were predictable in the end. A predator is predictable. That is the secret of a predator, that the predator never learns. It has only one idea, which is to close and to bite, and when the closing fails, it closes harder, because biting is the only thing it knows. The humans had counted on it. They had built the 900 craft specifically for the hour when the Kareth would stop being patient hunters and become frightened beasts, and they had been so certain the hour would come that the craft had sat fueled and ready in the bays for 19 years, their crews rotating through, always one shift fully suited, always ready to launch inside a minute, all for a charge that the humans knew was coming the way you know the sun is coming, long before it crests the dark. Aboard the deep choir, an alarm did sound, and Ren Sully heard the captain register it without alarm. 10,000 hunting ships, closing fast. Edric Ban had known they would come. The whole mothership had been built around the certainty that one day an enemy would stop being afraid and start charging, because a cornered people always charged in the end, and the deep choir had an answer for that too. The answer had been sleeping in its bays for 19 years. 900 small craft, and the crews who flew them, waiting for exactly this moment. Edric Ban gave Ren Sully the word, and she folded it into the song, a rising figure that ran through the launch decks like a held breath finally releasing. The bay doors opened along the flanks of the great hull. 900 small human craft poured out of the mothership at once, fast and tight and silent, and each one carried a smaller version of the same weapon the mothership carried. They were not fighters in the way the Kareth understood fighters. They did not shoot. They did not bite. They sang. Each one was a single resonance throat, a small tuned voice, built to add itself to the great voice of the mothership, and to spread that voice across the dark, where the deep choir's own cannons could not reach. The 900 fanned out in front of the charging Kareth fleet, taking up positions in a wide curving net, and then they began to sing the same note the mothership sang. And the song stopped being a wall the Kareth were driving into. It became a sphere the Kareth were already inside. On the resonance deck, Ren Sully felt the 900 craft leave the bays and felt them take their places, each one a new voice added to the chord, each one a point of the net closing around the charge. She had trained with their crews for years. She knew the pilots by the sound of their craft, the way she knew the cannons, the way she knew the reactors. When the 900 began to sing, the whole song changed shape under her hands. It went from a thing she pushed forward across 4,000 kilometers to a thing that surrounded its target on every side, and she had to hold all of it at once, the mothership's deep voice and the 900 small ones, keeping them all in pitch, keeping them all in time, weaving the 11 dead peoples through the whole vast structure of it, and the calm breath under everything. It was the hardest thing she had ever done. It was the only thing she had ever wanted to do. She did not miss a note. The Kareth pilots in the charge had no way to understand what was happening to them. Their instruments told them they were closing on a single large enemy. Their eyes told them the dark ahead was empty. And then their hulls began to ring, all of them at once, from a sound that had no source they could find, that came from the space around them as if the void itself had decided to break them, and the brave ones who pushed forward anyway only pushed deeper into the part of the song that was strongest. A hunting ship at full charge could not stop, could not turn, could not do anything but carry its crew into the note that unmade it. The charge that was meant to smother the human ship became, instead, the fastest way the Kareth had yet found to die. The 10,000 charging hunting ships ran into a sound that came from every direction at once. There was no front to break through. There was no flank to turn. There was no smothering the source, because the source was now everywhere, ahead and around and behind, and woven through the very space the charge was trying to cross. Every craft they passed sang the pitch that broke them. The great mothership behind sang the chord that held them in place. And the charge did not slow the deep choir for a single second. It simply gave the song more ships to take, fed 10,000 fresh hulls into the one note that unmade them, and the Kareth crews who had driven forward to smother the human ship found instead that they had driven their whole charge into the deepest part of the song. Drell Sath, watching from the stern of the Bone Crown where the flagship still held back, recorded the whole thing for a vault no one would ever play for entertainment again. He watched 10,000 hunting ships drive into the human song and come apart inside it, and he understood, finally and completely, that the humans had not been hiding a weakness behind their 3 calm words. They had been hiding this. They had let the Kareth count 1,100 ships and feel safe, because the 1,100 were never the point. The 1,100 were the bait that brought the Talon Court close enough to hear the one ship that mattered. The whole human border, every world and every defender, had been a single instrument aimed at a single performance, and the performance was the unmaking of the Talon Court. He did the arithmetic the way a weapons reader does, because it was the only thing left that he knew how to do. At the rate the song was breaking hulls, the entire 40,000 ship Talon Court would be gone in under an hour, not defeated, not driven off, unmade, plate by plate, into a field of drifting bone-white wreckage that would ring faintly with the human note for years, a graveyard that sang. He checked the number twice. There was no error in it. The fleet that had crossed into human space to take a 12th voice for the vault would itself be reduced to wreckage before the local star had moved a hand's width across the sky. He sent one last reading to Vasek Oren. It was not a weapons report. It was a single sentence, and it was the truest sentence Drell Sath had ever spoken in 90 years of speaking truth to the throne. He said, "We are the recording now." He meant it precisely. He was a weapons reader, and he chose his words the way he read his instruments, with no waste in them. The Kareth had spent 1,000 years making recordings of other people's dying. The vault behind the throne was the proof of their realness, the collection that said the Talon Court was the most real thing in the dark because it had pulled the most sound out of the most enemies. And now, in this hour, the Kareth had become the thing being recorded. The deep choir's instruments, and the 900 craft, and 100 quiet human worlds listening from across the border, were all capturing the long falling silence of the Talon Court, the way the Talon Court had captured 11 peoples. The hunter had become the trophy, the keeper had become the kept. Drell Sath had spent his life on the safe side of that line, and now the line had moved, and he was on the other side of it, and the worst part, the part that made him set down his instruments and simply watch, was that it was fair. By every measure of the Kareth's own law, it was perfectly, completely fair. Vasek Oren heard it, and for the first time in his long and terrible life, the Hunt Lord of the Kareth Talon Court felt the thing he had spent 11 species teaching others to feel. He felt small. He sat back down upon his throne, because his legs would no longer hold him standing, and he listened to his own fleet go silent around him, ship by ship, in a song he had not been allowed to hear the front of, only the long, unbearable end. The 11 voices in his ears were the peoples he had broken. The 12th sound, the new one, the one being recorded against his will, was the long falling silence of the Kareth themselves, and Vasek Oren knew with a cold and total certainty that he would be made to keep it forever. He could have run. The Bone Crown held back, far from the worst of the song, and it was fast, and the dark was wide. He could have fled and lived and carried the story home, the way the Kareth had always made one survivor flee and carry the story, so that the death sound would spread to every world that had not yet learned to fear the Talon Court. There was a grim instinct in it, even now. Let one ship live. Let one ship tell it. That was how the law worked. But the humans did not let him flee. They had planned for that too. Out in front, the 400 human defenders that had served as bait finally moved. They had not fired in the whole battle. They did not fire now. They simply spread, in a wide, slow arc, and closed the dark behind the Bone Crown, sealing the one path the Hunt Lord would have run down. They herded him, the way the Kareth had herded 1,000 fleeing prey across 1,000 years, gently, without a shot, without a word, toward the one place the humans wanted him to be. They wanted him close. They wanted Vasek Oren, the keeper of the vault, the maker of death sounds, the old man who had pressed 11 peoples like flowers, near enough to hear the song clearly, all the way to the end, with nothing between his ears and the truth of what was happening to him. The humans were not finished teaching, and the lesson, it turned out, had been built for an audience of one. The bone crown was herded inward, and Vasek Oren let it happen, because there was nothing left to fight toward and nothing left to run from. 40,000 hunting ships had become 8,000, then 4, then a number too small to be the Talon Court anymore. The great loud people were going quiet across the whole sky, ship by ship, voice by voice, and the Hunt Lord, who had built a vault out of other people's silence, had no recording to make of his own. There was no enemy scream to capture. There was only his own people falling still. On the resonance deck of the deep choir, Ren Sully held the song steady and felt every ship it took. She had thought, when she trained for this, that it would feel like winning. It did not feel like winning. It felt like work, careful and exact, the work of a hand closing slowly and completely around something that had spent 1,000 years closing its own hand around everyone else. She kept the calm breathing low beneath the 11 dead voices, because that was the part of the song that mattered most, the part that carried the meaning, and she kept her own breathing matched to it, even and unafraid, because Edric Ban had told her once, on the first day she came aboard, that the ship sang truest when its keeper was not afraid. She had not understood him then. She understood him now. The fear would have changed the note. The fear would have made the song a scream, and a scream was the one thing the humans had decided this ship would never be. Edric Ban walked the deck behind her, quiet, watching the readouts climb. When the Kareth fleet had fallen below 1,000 ships, he gave a new order, and it was not the order to finish them. It was the order to slow the song. Ren Sully eased the pitch down. The killing chord softened. The 40 resonance cannons fell silent one by one, and the 900 small craft drew back their voices, until the deep choir was no longer breaking hulls. It was only humming, low and patient, the way it had hummed for 19 years in the dark between two dead stars. The change ran through the whole ship like a long exhale. The change was felt as keenly aboard the 400 defenders as it was anywhere. Those crews had taken the post knowing what it meant. They had been sent to hold the front of the trap, to be the visible enemy, the bait that the Kareth would mass against, and the plan had never promised that all of them would live. A bait that the hunter sees through is no bait at all, and so the 400 had been ordered to behave exactly as a doomed forward line behaves, to hold and to wait and to draw the whole 40,000 ship wedge onto themselves, and to trust the great ship in the dark behind the enemy to do its work before the wedge closed. They had held. They had not fired. They had not run, and the work had been done in time, and not one of the 400 ships had been lost, because the song had reached the Kareth before the Kareth reached the 400. The defenders had been ready to die, and had not had to, and the difference between those two things was the whole gift the deep choir had given them. The remaining Kareth ships, perhaps 800 of them, hung in the wreckage of their own fleet, surrounded by the drifting bone-white ruin of everything the Talon Court had been, and waited to die, and did not. Vasek Oren did not understand. The law he had lived by for 200 years had no place for this. A hunter that had its prey beaten did not stop. A hunter took the death sound and added it to the vault, because that was the whole point, that had always been the only point. To stop now, with 800 ships at his mercy, was not mercy as the Kareth understood it. It was something stranger, something the Talon Court had no word for, and the absence of the word frightened Vasek Oren more than any weapon could have. The humans were not taking it. They were standing in the middle of a finished kill, with the killing blow ready in their hands, and they were choosing not to strike. It was, the human strategists had long understood, the hardest part of the whole plan, not the building of the ship, not the 19 years of waiting, not even the singing. The hardest part was the stopping. It would have been the easiest thing in the galaxy to let the song run to its natural end, to take all 40,000 ships, and the flagship too, to leave nothing of the Talon Court but wreckage, and be done with it forever. Every instinct of a people that had been threatened with the vault would have pulled that way. The Kareth had earned an ending like that 1,000 times over, but the humans had decided, in the cold rooms where they planned the war, that taking the last 800 would be a victory, and sparing them would be the end of the war, and that those were not the same thing. So they had built the stopping into the plan from the start, written it down beside the building and the waiting and the singing, and they had ordered Edric Band to stop, no matter how much the moment begged him to finish, because finishing was for people who wanted to win, and stopping was for people who wanted it over. A channel opened on the bone crown. It was the same calm human voice from beneath the song, but speaking now, in plain Kareth, perfectly pronounced, addressed to the Hunt Lord alone. It was Captain Edric Ban. He did not gloat. He did not list the dead. He did not make a single sound that could be called a scream, or a roar, or a threat in the way the Kareth made threats. He spoke to Vasek Orun the way the very first human message had spoken, evenly, without fear, the way you speak to someone you have already beaten and no longer need to frighten. He told the Hunt Lord 3 things. He said the humans had copied the vault. 9 years before, quietly, at a cost the humans would carry in silence, they had taken every recording the Kareth had ever made of every species they had broken, and those recordings were now held on the deep choir, and on Earth, and on 100 quiet worlds besides. They would be kept, not as trophies, not as proof of any human glory. They would be kept as memory, so that the Senate and the Alu and the Dreven and the 8 others would never again be only a sound a tyrant played for his own amusement on the nights he could not sleep. The humans had learned the names. They had learned the languages. They had learned what the Dreven had been saying as they died, every word, and they had written it down, and they would teach it to their children. The humans had given the dead their names back. The vault behind the throne was no longer the only copy, and so it was no longer a trophy at all. It was just a sad old recording of a crime, and everyone would know the crime now, by name. He said the Kareth would leave human space, and would never return, and that this was not a request, and there would be no second message. The deep choir would not move from the dark behind Earth's worlds. It did not need to. It would simply wait, the way it had waited 19 years, and if the Talon Court ever came again it would sing again, and there would be no fleet at all the next time, only the silence. And he said the last thing slowly, so that Vasek Orun could not possibly mistake it. He said the humans were letting the bone crown live, not out of weakness. The deep choir could break the flagship with a single note, and the Hunt Lord knew it now, had heard it in the dust his whole fleet had become, had felt it in the 11 voices pouring out of the dark on every channel he owned. The humans were not sparing him because they could not kill him. They were sparing him because they wanted a recording made after all, and only Vasek Orun could make it. They wanted him to carry home the sound of the Talon Court ending. They wanted him to take the recording of his own fleet's long falling silence, the 12th sound, the one his instruments had captured against his will, and lock it in the vault behind his throne, beside the 11 peoples he had broken. And they wanted him to play it. On the quiet nights, when sleep would not come, when only the old recordings could fill the dark, they wanted the Hunt Lord of the Kareth Talon Court to sit before his collection and listen to the death of everything he had built, for the rest of his life, the way he had listened to the deaths of 11 peoples who could not fight back. They wanted the Keeper to become the keeper of his own silence. It was the cruelest mercy the Kareth had ever been shown, and it was crueler precisely because it was a mercy, because there was no wound in it to be proud of, no enemy to curse, no scream to carry home and answer with another fleet. The humans had thought it through with the same patience they had spent on everything else. A dead Hunt Lord becomes a martyr. A dead fleet becomes a debt the survivors are sworn to repay. The Kareth had built their whole empire on exactly that, on the rage of the conquered turning into the obedience of the broken, and the humans had refused to give the Talon Court even one death to organize around. They had left Vasek Orun alive and humbled and carrying the proof of his own ruin in the vault where he kept his pride, so that there would be no martyr and no debt and no rage. There would only be an old man and a recording, and the slow, certain knowledge, spreading outward from the throne, that the Talon Court was finished. Drell Sath, the weapons reader, heard the message too, from his station at the stern, and he understood it more completely than his lord ever would. The humans had not beaten the Kareth with a bigger bite. They had beaten the entire idea the Kareth were built on. The Kareth believed a people were only as real as the noise they could force from others. The humans had arrived with no death sound on record, had been measured and weighed and called not real, and had then made 40,000 of the loudest ships in the galaxy go silent without forcing a single scream from a single crew. They had proven, in the only language the Kareth could hear, in the exact terms of the Kareth's own law, that the loudest people in the dark was not the one that screamed the most. It was the one that could make all the screaming stop and feel no need to scream itself. Vasek Oran sat on his throne for a long time. The Bone Crown's channels were quiet now. The humans had said their three things and gone silent, leaving the Hunt Lord alone with the choice. The vault hummed behind him, 11 voices and the new 12th he had never wanted, the long falling silence of his own fleet, recorded by the very instruments he had built to record everyone else, sealed now into his collection whether he willed it or not. He could have refused. The thought was there, and it was a Kareth thought, the only kind he had. He could have charged the Deep Choir with his last 800 ships and made the humans break him, and died loud, the way the law said a Kareth should die, in fire and motion and defiance, forcing the humans at least to spend the killing note on him. Better to be unmade in a charge than to live as a keeper of his own ruin. The weapons reader, watching the throne from the stern, saw the old Hunt Lord reach for it. He knew the reaching. He had seen it in 100 cornered enemies across 90 years, but the humans had taken even that. To charge now would only add the death sound of the Bone Crown to the song, and the humans would let it happen without a flicker, would absorb the last 800 ships into the note the way they had absorbed the first 39,000, and the recording the Kareth carried home would simply be a little longer. There was no loud death left to die. The humans had made every ending the same quiet ending. A Kareth could not scream his way out of a silence that did not care whether he screamed. The law that had made the Talon Court the terror of the region had been turned all the way around and handed back, and there was no move left on the board that the humans had not already answered 19 years before they ever heard the name Vasek Oran. He thought, in those long minutes before he spoke, about the 11. He had not thought about them as peoples in a very long time. They had been recordings to him for 200 years, sounds in a vault, proof of his realness, and he had never once let himself wonder what it had been like to be the Senate on the day their shells were cracked, or the Alu when their sons were taken, or the Dreven begging in a language no one bothered to learn. He had not had to wonder, because the law had told him they were not real, that their realness had ended the moment he pulled the sound out of them. But the calm breath was still going on beneath the 11 voices in his ears, even now, even in the quiet, and the breath would not let him keep the old comfort. The breath said the 11 had been real. The breath said they had been peoples, with names, with languages, with evening songs, and that a thing had been done to them that should not have been done, and that the doer of it was sitting on a throne with the proof of it humming behind him and no fleet left to pretend otherwise. Vasek Oran heard the 11 for the first time as what they had always been, and it was the worst sound he had ever heard, worse than any scream, because it was not a scream at all. It was the truth, and it was quiet, and it would not stop. So the Hunt Lord gave the order he had never in his life imagined giving. His voice, when it came, was not the voice that had sentenced 11 peoples. It was the voice of an old man who had finally heard something louder than himself. He told the last of the Talon Court to turn, and to leave human space, and to make no sound as they went. The 800 ships withdrew. They passed back out through the human border the same way they had come, in the open, in a line, except now the line was small, and broken, and silent, threading its way through the drifting wreckage of the 39,000 that had not turned back in time, and the 400 human defenders, the bait that had never fired a single shot in the whole battle, opened their slow arc and let them pass, and watched them go, and said nothing at all. Behind them, the deep choir kept humming. Ren Sully held the low note, the patient one, the one the ship had carried for 19 years, and as the Careth left she began, gently, to let the 11 dead voices fade out of the song, one by one. The wet click of the Senate, the high singing of the Alu, the long falling silence of the Dreven. She set each one down the way you set down something you have carried a very long way, with care, with respect, because they were not weapons to her. They had never been weapons, they were peoples, and they had done their work, and now they could rest. She left only the calm breathing at the end, even, unafraid, alive. It followed the Careth all the way to the edge of human space, on every channel they used, to find each other in the dark, so that the last thing the broken Taloncourt heard as it fled was not its own fear, and not the screaming of its victims, but the quiet, steady breath of the one people it had called not real, breathing on, calm and unhurried, long after the great loud fleet had gone silent forever. The Bone Crown carried the story home, exactly as the humans had planned, and the story did to the Careth Taloncourt what no fleet ever could. It spread, not as a death sound, because there was none. It spread as a silence, which is a far harder thing to stop. A death sound can be answered. A people that hears its neighbor scream can tell itself that it will be different, that it will be stronger, that it will not give the hunter the satisfaction. But there was no scream to answer here. There was only the impossible quiet fact that 40,000 hunting ships had gone out to take a 12th voice, and 800 had come home with no voice at all, carrying instead the recording of their own undoing. You cannot harden yourself against a story like that. There is nothing in it to push against. It simply settles into a people like cold settles into a body, and it does not leave. There was a moment, in the first months, when the strongest of the surviving Careth captains tried to keep the law alive by force. He gathered what ships he could, perhaps 200 hulls drawn from the scattered remnants of a dozen fleets, and he declared himself the new edge of the Taloncourt, and he sent a message of his own to a vassal world that had stopped paying tribute, promising the vault, promising the old terror, promising that nothing had changed. The vassal world did not answer him with fear. It answered him with a recording. It sent back the two numbers that everyone in the region now carried, 40,000 in and 800 out, with no words attached, because no words were needed. The captain understood. 200 hulls was not 40,000, and if 40,000 had gone into the human dark and come out as 800, then 200 was not a fleet at all. It was a gesture. He disbanded his ships within the week, and the law died a little more, and the recording the vassal world had sent did more to end the Taloncourt than any weapon, because it was the Careth's own proof, turned around, the way everything the Careth had built was now being turned around. The Careth had 11 other vassal peoples in their court, conquered species who served the Taloncourt out of fear of the vault, who paid tribute and gave up their young to the hunting fleets and bowed their heads to the law, because the alternative was to have their death sound pressed like a flower behind the Hunt Lord's throne. Within a year, every one of them had heard what happened at the human border. They had heard that 40,000 hunting ships went out, and 800 came back. They had heard that the great loud Hunt Lord now sat behind a vault that held the silence of his own fleet, and that he played it on the quiet nights, because the humans had told him to, and because there was nothing else left in the vault that meant anything anymore. A people are only as real as the noise they can force from others. That was the law. The Careth had taught it to the whole region of space with 1,000 years of screaming, hammered it into a dozen civilizations, made it the truth that every conquered world woke up to. And the humans had taken that exact law, that precise and terrible law, and turned it around, because the Careth could no longer force noise from anyone. They had been made quiet, in front of the whole galaxy, by a ship that would not stop singing, and a law that cannot force noise from its own master is a dead law. It died the moment the first vassal people understood it. It did not die slowly. The 11 vassal peoples did not rise up in a war. They did not need to. That was the strangest part, the part that the human strategists had foreseen and the Careth never could have. There was nothing to rise up against anymore. The Taloncourt had ruled by being the loudest, most terrible thing in the dark, and it was not the loudest thing in the dark now, and everyone knew it. So the vassal peoples simply stopped being afraid, one at a time, the way the Kareth ships had gone silent, one at a time. They stopped sending tribute. They stopped giving up their young. They stopped answering the Talon Court's calls. And the Kareth, who had no fleet left to enforce a law no one believed in anymore, could do nothing but listen to their empire go quiet around them, in the same order, with the same patience, as the song at the human border. The Talon Court did not fall in fire. It fell in silence, the way it had taught the galaxy that real things fall, except that now it was the Kareth doing the falling, and there was no recording made, because no one cared to keep it. Drell Sath, the weapons reader, did not stay to watch the end of it. He had spent 90 years measuring the bite of ships, and he had learned, in 1 hour at the human border, that he had been measuring the wrong thing his whole life. He had been so proud of his accuracy, he had counted 1,100 human ships and been right about every one of them, and his accuracy had meant nothing, because he had been counting the visible thing and missing the real one. He had measured bite, when the question had always been about voice. He could not go back to his instruments after that. The numbers had betrayed him, at the one moment they mattered, not because they were wrong, but because they had been answering a question no one should have been asking. So he left the Talon Court. He took a small ship, an old scout, and he went out into the dark on his own, and the last anyone heard of him in the broken remnants of the court, he was traveling from world to world among the freed vassal peoples, recording their voices. Not the death sounds, not the screams. He recorded the living ones, the singing ones, the lullabies and the work songs, and the long evening calls that a people make when they are not afraid. He went to the Senate and the Alu and the Dreven, what was left of them, the scattered survivors the Kareth had not quite managed to finish, and he learned their languages, every word, the way the humans had, and he wrote down what they remembered of themselves before the hunters came. He had become, in his old age, a different kind of keeper. He kept the proof that a people did not have to scream to be real. He had spent 90 years building a vault of deaths. He spent his last years building a vault of voices, and the second vault was the only thing he had ever made that he was not ashamed of. There were peoples in the region who had never been touched by the Talon Court, far worlds that had only heard of the Kareth the way one hears of a storm on a distant coast, and even they changed their charts after the human border. They drew a wide, quiet ring around the blue world and the dark behind it, and they marked it, not with a warning and not with a name, because the humans did not use names as warnings, but simply with the recorded fact of what had happened there. The plain number that needed no translation in any language. 40,000 went in, 800 came out. Every captain who read those two numbers understood them, and every captain who understood them gave the place a wide berth, not out of fear exactly, but out of the same instinct that keeps a careful creature away from the one part of the dark where the largest thing in the world is known to wait, patiently, for a reason to wake. Aboard the deep choir, the war ended the way the humans had built it to end. Quietly. There was no celebration on the resonance deck. There was no cheering, no breaking out of stores, no triumph. There was only Ren Sully, easing the great ship back down to its patient hum, closing the long panels along the spine so that 4,000 meters of hull became a hull again and not a mouth, and Captain Edric Ban standing behind her, watching the last of the Kareth wreckage drift slowly off the readouts, where it would go on ringing faintly with the human note for years, a graveyard that sang, the only monument the Talon Court would ever get. Drick Ban did not give a speech. The humans had not built the deep choir for speeches. He told Ren Sully she had sung it true. That was all. From Edric Ban, who had waited 19 years in the dark and used the ship exactly once, and meant to need it never again, it was a great deal, and she knew it, and she carried it for the rest of her life. She thought about Drell Sath sometimes, in the years after, though she never knew his name. The humans had intercepted his small scout's transmissions as he wandered the freed worlds recording living voices, and they had listened, and they had understood what he was doing, and they had let him be. There was a strange kinship in it that the human strategist noted and did not interfere with. A Kareth weapons reader who had spent 90 years building a vault of deaths, now building a vault of voices, was doing the same work the deep choir had been built to do. He was giving the dead their names back, one world at a time, on a small old ship, alone in the dark. The humans decided he had earned the dark he wandered in, and they left him to it, and somewhere out among the scattered Senate, and the broken Alu, and the few surviving Dreven, an old hunter went on recording the songs of the living until the day his small ship went quiet for the last time, and no one made a recording of that, because he had not wanted one, and the humans, who understood such things, did not make one either. Rensselaer sat at her console for a long while after the order to stand down. The hull hummed under her hands, low and even, the way it had hummed her whole time aboard, the way it had hummed through the deck plates of her childhood station, the way it would go on humming for as long as it sat in the dark behind Earth's worlds, finished and silent and ready. She had been 22 when she sang the song. She would be older when she sang it again, if she ever had to, and she found that she hoped she never would, and she understood now, fully, what the old engineers had meant when they built a 4,000-meter weapon and made its first and last purpose to be heard, rather than to strike. The deep choir had not been built to win battles. It had been built to end them. There was a difference, and the difference was the whole reason the humans had spent 19 years and the wealth of 100 worlds building a ship that sang instead of one that screamed. A ship that screamed would have killed 40,000 Kareth and started a 1,000-year war of revenge, because that was the only language the Kareth understood, and a death sound always wanted another death sound to answer it. Revenge was a sound that echoed. It bounced from world to world forever, each scream calling up the next, and a people that won its wars by screaming was a people that would be at war until it died. The humans had seen that trap from a long way off. They had watched the Kareth for 19 years and understood that they could not simply outscream the loudest people in the galaxy, because even if they won, the screaming would never stop. So they had built a ship that sang, and a ship that sang had done something the Kareth had no answer for. It had won so completely and so quietly that there was nothing left to take revenge for. You cannot avenge a silence. There is no scream in it to carry forward, no echo to bounce from world to world, no sound to call up the next sound. The humans had ended the war by making it impossible to continue, and they had spent 19 patient years in the dark to be sure they could end it that way and no other. There were those among the humans, in the long years before the Kareth came, who had argued for a louder ship, a faster one, a fleet of 1,000 hulls that could meet the Talon Court head-on, and trade fire and win by sheer weight of metal. The argument had a logic to it, and it had nearly carried. But the people who had studied the Kareth the longest had asked a quieter question. They had asked not how to beat the Talon Court, but how to end it, so that it would stay ended, so that no human child 100 years from now would have to fight the war again. And the answer to that question was not a louder ship. It was a ship that could take the loudest people in the galaxy and make them an example so complete, so quiet, so total, that no one who heard of it would ever want to be the next entry in the lesson. That was the ship they had built. They had spent 19 years building it, and the wealth of 100 worlds, and they had sat it in the dark and waited, and they had been right. Earth never sent another message to the Kareth. It did not need to. The first message had been 3 words, then come closer, and the Kareth had come closer, and they had heard the answer, and the answer had been enough. The blue world at the edge of the maps, the people with no death sound on record, the ones the law said were not real, were left alone after that. Not only by the Kareth, who had no fleet, and soon no empire, but by everyone in the whole region who heard what the Kareth had learned at Earth's border. The story spread among the strong the way it spread among the freed, and the strong drew the same conclusion the weak had drawn, which was that whatever the humans were, they were not to be made to scream, because the things that tried it did not get a scream from the humans. They got the song, and the song did not stop. Far out in the dark behind Earth's worlds, between 2 dead stars, the deep choir went back to waiting. It drew the colonists' attention sometimes. On the rare nights its hum could be felt from the nearest station, a low, patient note that ran through the deck plates and the hull and the teeth of anyone standing close, the same note that had run through Ren Sully's bare child feet a long time ago. Most people learned not to hear it, the way you stop hearing your own heart, the way you stop hearing anything that is always there. But the ones who listened, really listened, the children who pressed their hands flat to the cold floor, the way she once had, said there was something underneath the hum, something low and steady, that did not belong to the machinery at all. It was a calm breath, even, unafraid, the keeper's breath, folded into the heart of the ship, so that even when no one was singing, even on the quietest night with the whole crew asleep, the deep choir would never quite be silent. Ren Sully had put it there on purpose, the same way she had built it into the song, the night after the Careth withdrew. She had decided that the galaxy should always be able to hear it, faint and steady, on every channel, in the dark. Not a threat, not a death sound, not a roar, just a reminder, for anyone who ever again counted humanity's ships and called them few, and weighed humanity's worlds and called them small, and measured humanity's voice and called the people not real, and came with a vault and a law and 40,000 hunting ships to make them scream. Ren Sully served aboard the deep choir for the rest of her working life, and she trained the keeper who came after her, a quiet young man who had pressed his hands to a cold floor as a child the same way she had, and she taught him everything, the cannons and the reactors and the 900 craft and the long patient note. But the one thing she taught him last, on the day she finally left the great ship, was the calm breath. She told him where she had folded it into the heart of the song, and why, and she made him promise to keep it there, to renew it, to let his own breath replace hers one day, so that the reminder would never grow old, so that the deep choir would always carry a living, unafraid sound in its center, even on the quietest night with the whole crew asleep. He promised. The keepers always promised, and so the breath went on, passed hand to hand down the years, each keeper adding their own quiet to the ship, so that the deep choir's heart was never any one person's, and never went silent, the way a people's courage is never any one person's, and never quite ends. The reminder was simple, and it was always there, and it would always be there. The humans were not loud because they could not bite. That was the lie the Careth had told themselves, the lie that the whole region had believed, the lie that had cost the Talon Court its fleet, and its empire and its law. The humans were quiet because they did not need to be loud. They had measured exactly what their voice could do, in the dark between two dead stars, across 19 patient years, and they had decided to keep that voice folded away, where no one could hear it, because a people that knows precisely how loud it can be has no need to prove it. And on the day someone forgot that, and came closer the way they had been told to, the deep choir would open along the spine, and draw back its great overlapping panels, and tune itself across 4,000 meters of patient hull, and roar one more time, and the galaxy would learn again what it had learned at Earth's border on the day 40,000 hunting ships went out and 800 came home. It would learn that the most dangerous people in the dark are not the ones who make the most noise. They are the ones who decide, calmly, with no fear at all, exactly when the noise should stop. And then they make it stop.